The grand piano stood silent as the last perfect note faded. 12-year-old Marcus Johnson lowered his hands as gasps filled the ballroom. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield collapsed into her chair, face drained of color. The adoption papers she had mockingly waved now trembled in her manicured hands. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about underdogs who prove their worth against all odds. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Marcus Johnson was not your average 12-year-old boy. Beneath his quiet demeanor and watchful brown eyes lay a brilliant mind and a gift that would soon shock Boston's elite. Living in Oakwood Heights, an affluent suburb where his family could barely afford a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the only rundown building on the edge of the district, Marcus stood out in all the ways that made life difficult. His mother, Tanya Johnson, a hardworking woman of 35, with premature lines of worry etched around her eyes, had managed to secure a position as a housekeeper for the Whitfield family 3 years ago. The Whitfields were not just wealthy, they were Boston royalty. Alexander Whitfield, 60, had built a tech empire from nothing, earning his billions through innovation and relentless work ethic. His much younger second wife, Eleanor Whitfield, 38, came from old money and made sure everyone knew it. While Alexander was often praised for his philanthropic efforts, Eleanor was known for her extravagant parties and cutting remarks. The Whitfield mansion sprawled across 3 acres of manicured grounds, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and priceless art adorning every room. For Marcus, accompanying his mother to work was not a choice, but a necessity. They couldn't afford childcare, and since his father had died of heart failure 2 years ago, leaving them with medical debts that seemed insurmountable, Tanya had no choice but to bring her son along during school breaks and weekends. Eleanor had made it abundantly clear that Marcus was to remain invisible. "Keep that boy out of sight," she had instructed Tanya on the first day she'd brought Marcus. "I don't want to see or hear him." The help should be seen as little as possible, and their offspring not at all. So Marcus had learned to move like a shadow through the servant quarters, reading books he'd borrowed from the public library, or doing homework in the small storage room adjacent to the kitchen. But when the Whitfields were out and the other staff busy, Marcus was drawn to one room like a moth to flame the music room. At its center stood a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its polished ebony surface gleaming in the sunlight that streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus had discovered his love for music at school, where an old upright piano in the music room had become his refuge during lunch breaks. He'd never had formal lessons, they couldn't afford them, but he had taught himself to play by watching YouTube tutorials on his mother's old smartphone and practicing silently on a paper keyboard he had drawn. Life in their tiny apartment was a constant struggle. The ceiling leaked when it rained, the heating worked sporadically at best, and they shared a pull-out couch because they couldn't afford a proper bed. Yet Tanya never stopped dreaming of a better future for her son. She worked 2 additional jobs on her days off, from the Whitfield stocking shelves at a grocery store and cleaning offices at night, saving every penny for Marcus's education. What neither Tanya nor Marcus realized was that someone had noticed the boy's secret visits to the music room. Mr. James Washington, the Whitfield's 65-year-old gardener, who had worked for Boston's elite families for over 40 years, had seen Marcus slipping into the room on several occasions. Rather than report him, Mr. Washington had quietly observed from outside, watching as the boy would first touch the keys reverently, then begin to play haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence. As summer approached, Eleanor Whitfield was planning her biggest event of the season, a charity gala to benefit underprivileged youth. The irony was not lost on the staff, who had overheard her true feelings on numerous occasions. "These people need to learn to pull themselves up by their bootstraps," she had said during a lunch with her equally wealthy friends. "But it looks good to throw money at their problems once a year." With Alexander frequently away on business trips, Eleanor ran the household with an iron fist. The staff walked on eggshells around her, knowing her temper could flare at the slightest provocation. Tanya bore the brunt of Eleanor's displeasure, enduring daily criticism and barely veiled racist comments. "Tanya, the silverware still looks cloudy. "Don't you people know how to polish properly?" Eleanor would say, inspecting a perfectly gleaming spoon. "Or make sure you dust under every object this time. Your kind always seems to miss the details." As the gala approached, Eleanor's demands became increasingly impossible. "The entire house must be spotless," she instructed Tanya, as she followed her from room to room. "I want every surface to shine, every floor polished, every window crystal clear. My guests are the most important people in Boston, and they expect perfection." Meanwhile, Marcus had found himself increasingly drawn to the piano. During the rare moments when the music room was empty, he would play softly, his fingers dancing over the keys, as he lost himself in the music. What he didn't know was that his private concerts would soon set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. 2 days before the gala, Eleanor Whitfield stormed into the kitchen where Tanya was preparing lunch. Her face was flushed with anger, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. "Someone has been in the music room," she announced, her voice sharp as a knife. "The piano bench was moved, and there are fingerprints on my Steinway. Explain this immediately." Tanya froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Marcus had promised to stay in the servant quarters. Had he broken that promise? "I cleaned the music room yesterday." "Mrs. Whitfield," she said carefully. "Perhaps I moved the bench while dusting." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Do not lie to me. These are not cleaning marks. Someone has been playing my piano. Was it your boy?" Before Tanya could answer, Mr. Washington stepped into the kitchen, a basket of freshly cut flowers in his weathered hands. "Pardon me, Mrs. Whitfield," he said, his voice calm and measured despite the tension in the room. "I believe I'm responsible. I was checking the piano yesterday, making sure it was properly cleaned for the tuner who's coming tomorrow. Must have left some marks. Won't happen again." Eleanor looked skeptical, but seemed unwilling to challenge the elderly gardener who had been with the family since before her marriage to Alexander. "See that it doesn't," she said coldly. "And install a security camera in the music room immediately. I want to know if anyone unauthorized enters." That evening, as Marcus helped his mother fold laundry in the small utility room, Tanya questioned him. "Have you been in the music room, Marcus? Mrs. Whitfield is very upset." Marcus looked down at the stack of Egyptian cotton sheets, unable to meet his mother's eyes. "Just once or twice, Mom, when no one was around. I'm careful not to touch anything except the piano." Tanya sighed deeply. "You know we can't afford any trouble, Marcus. If Mrs. Whitfield finds out, I could lose this job. And then, what would we do?" The next day, while Eleanor was out at her spa appointment, Marcus couldn't resist one more chance to play. He slipped into the music room, unaware of the newly installed camera hidden in a decorative vase. Sitting at the piano, he began to play a piece he had been working on for weeks, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. His small fingers stretched to reach the chords, his face a mask of concentration as he lost himself in the music. When Eleanor returned and checked the security footage, her outrage was immediate and explosive. She confronted Tanya in the main hallway, not caring who overheard. "Your son has been defiling my Steinway. How dare you bring that undisciplined brat into my house and allow him to touch my possessions?" Tanya stood rigid, her hands clasped tightly to stop them from shaking. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Whitfield. It won't happen again." "You're right, it won't," Eleanor hissed. "Because you're fired. Both of you out of my house by tomorrow morning." What seems to be the problem here? The deep voice of Alexander Whitfield cut through the tension. Having returned early from his business trip, he stood in the doorway, his tall frame imposing despite his casual attire. Eleanor quickly adjusted her expression. "Alexander, darling, you're home early." "I was just explaining to Tanya that her son has been using our music room without permission. The security camera caught him playing the Steinway today." Alexander's eyebrows rose. "Playing it. As in making music." "If you can call it that," Eleanor said dismissively. "Probably just banging on the keys like a monkey." Alexander frowned slightly. "Let me see the footage." Despite Eleanor's protests, Alexander insisted on watching the video. His expression changed as he watched Marcus play, something akin to appreciation crossing his features. "The boy has talent," he said finally. Untrained but definite talent. He turned to Tanya. How old is your son, Tanya? 12, sir, she replied softly. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Eleanor, I have an idea. The gala tomorrow is for underprivileged youth. Correct. What better way to showcase our commitment than to include this young man? It would be excellent for our image. Eleanor's eyes widened in horror. You can't possibly suggest allowing the housekeeper's son to attend our gala. Not just attend, Alexander said firmly. I think he should be introduced to our guests. It would demonstrate our dedication to the cause. For a moment it seemed Eleanor might explode, but then her expression shifted subtly. Yes, she said slowly, a calculated look replacing her anger. Yes, I suppose you're right, darling. It would make for excellent publicity. The relief Tanya felt at not losing her job quickly gave way to apprehension. She knew Eleanor well enough to recognize when she was plotting something. Later that evening, as Tanya helped Marcus prepare for bed in their small apartment, she couldn't shake her unease. Mrs. Whitfield wants you to attend the gala tomorrow night, she told him. Marcus's eyes lit up. Really, I can go to the party. It's not exactly like that, Tanya explained carefully. Mr. Whitfield thinks it would look good for their charity image, but Mrs. Whitfield, I don't trust her intentions, Marcus. The next morning, Mr. Washington approached Marcus as he waited for his mother to complete her morning tasks. Heard you're attending the big party tonight, he said, his voice low. Marcus nodded eagerly. Mr. Washington, is it true? They have famous musicians perform at these parties. The old gardener smiled. Indeed they do, son. But listen carefully now. These fancy folks, they'll smile to your face while looking down on you. Remember who you are. Your dignity is something they can never take unless you let them. He pressed a folded piece of paper into Marcus's hand. I heard you playing Bach. Try this piece. It speaks to the soul. Throughout the day, Tanya frantically tried to find appropriate clothing for Marcus to wear to the gala. Their neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez lent them her son's outgrown suit, which Tanya stayed up late altering to fit Marcus better. Her hopes for the evening dimmed considerably when Eleanor summoned her to the master bedroom that afternoon. Tanya, let me be absolutely clear, Eleanor said as she tried on diamond earrings worth more than Tanya would earn in 10 years. Your son will not be attending as a guest. He will be serving drinks. I've arranged a server's uniform for him. She smiled thinly. After all, we must all know our proper place in this world. That night, as guests began to arrive, Marcus took one last opportunity to visit the music room. In his borrowed suit, before changing into the server's uniform, Eleanor had provided he sat at the piano and played the piece Mr. Washington had given him, Bach's Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring. As the last notes faded, he made a silent promise to himself. Someday he would play on a stage where people came to hear him, not to mock or dismiss him. He had no idea how soon that opportunity would come. The Whitfield mansion buzzed with frantic activity as the final preparations for the gala reached their crescendo. Crystal chandeliers sparkled with renewed brilliance after being meticulously cleaned. Florists arranged elaborate centerpieces of white orchids and blue hydrangeas on tables draped in silk cloths. Caterers hustled between the industrial-sized kitchen and the grand ballroom, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more per serving than Tanya earned in an hour. The contrast between the wealthy world being constructed in the main house and the controlled chaos of the service areas was stark and telling. While staff members rushed about in crisp black and white uniforms, their faces shiny with perspiration, the mansion itself was transformed into a glittering wonderland of luxury. Marcus stood transfixed at the entrance to the ballroom, his eyes wide as he took in the transformation. The room he had only seen empty now pulsed with an energy that made the air feel electric. At the center of it all stood the grand piano, spotlighted as if it were a shrine, its ebony surface reflecting the dancing lights from the chandeliers. Marcus, what are you doing standing there? Tanya hurried over her uniform, perfectly pressed, despite having been on her feet since dawn. Mrs. Whitfield will have a fit if she sees you gawking. Go to the kitchen and help Mrs. Patterson with the appetizer trays. Marcus reluctantly tore his gaze away from the piano. Mom, did you know Vincent Reynolds is playing tonight? He's one of the most famous pianists in America. Tanya's expression softened slightly. "Yes, I heard. Now hurry along before we both get in trouble." In the kitchen, Marcus was immediately put to work arranging delicate pastries on silver trays. Mrs. Patterson, the head cook, who had been with the Whitfields for over 15 years, gave him a sympathetic smile. "First time working a big event, huh?" she asked, her southern accent thick and comforting. "Just remember, stay invisible unless someone wants something, and never ever make eye contact with Mrs. Whitfield." Not all the staff were as kind as Mrs. Patterson. Thomas, one of the bartenders hired specifically for the event, scowled when Marcus was assigned to collect empty glasses from his station. "Great," he muttered to another server. "They've got kids working now. And not just any kid." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Marcus pretended not to hear, focusing instead on carefully stacking the expensive crystal glasses without making a sound. At 4 o'clock, Alexander Whitfield gathered the staff for a brief pep talk. Unlike his wife, he addressed everyone by name and thanked them for their hard work. "Tonight is not just about raising money," he said. "It's about showing that everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed." His eyes found Marcus in the crowd, and he nodded slightly. Everyone. Eleanor arrived moments after her husband left, wearing a gown that probably cost more than the annual rent on Tanya and Marcus's apartment. Her critical gaze swept the assembled staff. "Remember, this event will be attended by the most influential people in Boston. One mistake, one spill, one wrong word, and you're all replaceable." Her eyes landed on Marcus, and her lips curved into something that resembled a smile, but held no warmth, "especially some of you." The server's uniform Eleanor had provided for Marcus was, as Tanya had feared, deliberately too large. The pants pooled around his ankles, and the vest hung from his shoulders like a sack. In a small act of defiance, Tanya had spent her lunch break taking in the seams as best she could with the limited supplies available. "Stand up straight," she whispered as she adjusted his bow tie. "No matter what happens tonight, remember that you are just as good as anyone who walks through those doors." At 5:30, the first guests began to arrive. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, disgorging men in impeccable tuxedos and women dripping in jewels. Marcus watched from behind a pillar as they air-kissed and fake-laughed, commenting on each other's appearances with words that sounded like compliments but carried barbs just beneath the surface. "Darling, that dress is so brave for your figure." "Oh, Charles, I hadn't heard your company downsized. How resilient you are." Vincent Reynolds, the renowned pianist, arrived fashionably late. Unlike the other guests, he barely acknowledged the staff brushing past Marcus without a glance and heading straight for the open bar. Tall, with silver-streaked hair and a perpetual scowl, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew his worth to the penny. As the ballroom filled, Marcus was instructed to circulate with trays of champagne flutes. The guests took the drinks without looking at him, their conversations continuing uninterrupted, as if he were an automated serving machine rather than a human being. "Can you believe they let the help bring their children?" he overheard one woman whisper to another, not bothering to lower her voice as he stood right beside them. "Eleanor must be getting soft. In my house, I have a strict no-children policy for the staff." The other woman nodded sagely. "It's so hard to find good help these days. They want weekends off living wages, all sorts of ridiculous demands." Marcus felt his cheeks burning but kept his expression neutral as he'd been instructed. He noticed other differences too. The way the white servers were asked to fetch things while he was commanded. The way some guests moved their purses or wallets to their other side when he approached. The subtle shifting away, the slight curl of lips, the momentary pauses in conversation. 100 small cuts, all in the first hour. Now I want you to really think about this situation for a moment. Can you imagine being treated this way, especially as a child? Comment number 1. If you believe people should be judged by their character, not their appearance or background. Like this video if you've ever felt invisible or underestimated. And subscribe if you want to see more stories about justice and overcoming prejudice. Do you think Marcus should keep quiet and accept this treatment, or is he right to dream of more? Let's continue and find out what happens when the evening takes an unexpected turn. By 8 o'clock, the Whitfield mansion throbbed with the sounds of Boston's elite at play. 300 guests filled the ballroom, their combined net worth rivaling the GDP of a small nation. Crystal glasses clinked, expensive perfumes mingled in the air, and beneath it all ran an undercurrent of competition: who had donated the most, whose child had been accepted to the most prestigious school, whose summer home had the better view. Marcus moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible until needed, then summoned with snapped fingers or impatient waves. His arms ached from holding trays at precisely the right height, and his borrowed dress shoes pinched his toes mercilessly. "More champagne here, boy," called a red-faced man whose belly strained against his custom tuxedo. He didn't look at Marcus as he grabbed a fresh glass, nearly knocking over the others on the tray. Not once had anyone said please or thank you. Not once had anyone called him by his name, which was clearly visible on the name tag all servers were required to wear. At 8:30, Eleanor Whitfield tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute. The crystalline ring silenced the crowd immediately. She stood on the small stage that had been erected beside the grand piano, resplendent in her designer gown diamonds, catching the light with every small movement. "Distinguished guests, dear friends," she began, her voice carrying easily across the now quiet room. "Thank you for joining us tonight for our annual Brighter Futures Charity Gala. As you know, Alexander and I believe deeply in bringing culture and refinement to underprivileged communities." She paused for the approving murmurs that followed. "Tonight, your generous donations will fund music programs in schools that sadly lack such essential cultural education." Alexander joined his wife on stage, his genuine smile, a contrast to her practiced one. "Tonight's entertainment is particularly special," he added. "The renowned Vincent Reynolds has graciously agreed to perform for us, and the amount raised will be directly tied to your appreciation of his talent. The more you enjoy the music, the more generous we hope you'll be." Applause filled the room as all eyes turned expectantly to the grand piano, but Vincent Reynolds was nowhere to be seen. Eleanor's smile remained fixed, though Marcus, standing near the stage with a water pitcher, could see the panic beginning to form in her eyes. Alexander stepped off the stage to search for the pianist, while Eleanor vamped for time, highlighting some of their foundation's past successes. Marcus glanced toward the bar and saw Vincent Reynolds slumped on a stool, his face flushed, his movements uncoordinated as he gestured for another drink. The man was clearly intoxicated, possibly too impaired to perform. The minutes stretched uncomfortably. Guests began to shift and whisper. Eleanor's smile grew increasingly strained, and then disaster struck. As Marcus moved through a particularly crowded section of the room, a large man backed up without looking, bumping into Marcus with enough force to send the tray of drinks flying. Champagne splashed across the silk gown of one of Eleanor's closest friends, Beatrice Harrington, president of the Boston Arts Council. The woman shrieked as if she'd been burned, though the liquid was merely cool and wet. "My gown, this is a Dior original." Conversation stopped. All eyes turned to the scene. Eleanor rushed over her face, a mask of solicitous concern for her friend, and barely contained fury as she glared at Marcus. "I am so terribly sorry, Beatrice," she said, snapping her fingers for another server to bring towels. "These people can be so clumsy." She turned to Marcus, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "What is wrong with you? Can't you do anything right?" The silence in the room was absolute now. Everyone was watching, some with embarrassment, others with a barely concealed hunger for drama. Tanya pushed through the crowd, trying to reach her son, but 2 security guards blocked her path at a subtle signal from Eleanor. Perhaps it was the stress of the evening, or the humiliation burning in her gut, as she realized Vincent Reynolds would not be performing, or simply the opportunity to assert her superiority in front of her peers. Whatever the reason, Eleanor Whitfield chose that moment to unleash the cruelty that had been simmering beneath her polished exterior all night. "Well, since our entertainment seems to be indisposed," she said loudly, grabbing Marcus by the shoulder and propelling him toward the piano, "perhaps we should find an alternative." She pushed him onto the piano bench, her smile razor-sharp. "This young man has been sneaking into my music room to play my Steinway. Perhaps he'd like to demonstrate his talents for us now." The crowd tittered nervously. A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. Eleanor's social power was too absolute, her influence too far-reaching for anyone to risk opposing her publicly. Come now, she continued, her voice honey-sweet with malice. Show us what you've been practicing in secret. If you can actually play this piano, really play it, not just plink around, I'll adopt you myself. She laughed, and after a beat, many in the crowd joined in. Imagine one of them in my home permanently. From her purse, she produced a folded document with an elaborate seal and ribbon. I even have the papers right here. I had them drawn up as a prop for the donation ceremony later, but we might as well put them to use now. The adoption papers were waved like a flag before the crowd, eliciting more uncertain laughter. Marcus sat frozen on the bench, his hands trembling slightly. The spotlight felt hot on his skin, the weight of hundreds of stares pressing down on his shoulders. He could see his mother struggling against the security guards, her face contorted with helpless rage and fear. Vincent Reynolds chose that moment to stagger into the ballroom immediately, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of a performer, despite his inebriated state. "What's happening?" he slurred loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Am I late for my solo?" Eleanor's expression flickered with panic before settling into grim determination. "It seems you're in no condition to perform, Mr. Reynolds," she said coldly. "Fortunately, we have a replacement. This young man has been secretly practicing on my piano. He's going to show us what he can do." She turned back to Marcus, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Either play something or your mother is fired tonight, and I'll make sure she never works in this city again." Marcus looked up at her, meeting her gaze directly for the first time. Then he turned to the keys, ivory and ebony, stretching before him like a road leading either to salvation or ruin. He placed his fingers on the cool surface, took a deep breath, and began to play. Marcus's fingers touched the keys tentatively at first, like a swimmer testing unknown waters. He played a simple melody, one he had practiced countless times on his paper keyboard at home, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Eleanor's smile widened, cruel satisfaction gleaming in her eyes at what she assumed would be a humiliating failure. But then something shifted. Marcus's hands moved with increasing confidence, transforming the simple tune into something more complex. The melody remained recognizable, but he added harmonies, embellishments, his small fingers finding chords that changed the childish song into a sophisticated musical exploration. The laughter died away. Eleanor's smile faltered. Marcus transitioned smoothly into Bach's Goldberg Variations, the piece Mr. Washington had slipped him. The complicated runs and trills flowed from his fingers, as if he'd been playing the piece his entire life. In reality, he had studied it for months, watching videos of performances over and over, practicing the finger positions silently on his makeshift paper keyboard late at night, when his mother was asleep. The muscles in his hands remembered what they had never actually performed before. His entire body swayed with the music, eyes closed, face transported. Every hour he had spent teaching himself every moment of longing. When he'd passed music stores with pianos he couldn't afford to touch every night. Spent dreaming of having a real instrument of his own. All of it poured into his brakes. Playing now. In his mind's eye, Marcus saw his father sitting beside him on the bench, felt the ghost of his hand on his shoulder. His dad had loved music, had sung to him every night before bed, until the hospital bills and medications had stolen his voice along with everything else. Marcus played for him now, each note a promise that his father's dreams for him had not died. The crowd stood motionless, cocktails forgotten in slack-hands conversations abandoned mid-sentence. Even the servers had stopped to listen, trays held aloft, as if frozen in time. Eleanor Whitfield's face had transformed from smug certainty to disbelief to something approaching horror. This was not part of her plan. This talented child was not supposed to exist. The wealthy audience members exchanged glances that spoke volumes: surprise, discomfort, reluctant admiration. Some shifted awkwardly, suddenly aware of their complicity in what had been intended as a public humiliation. Others simply listened, transported by the unexpected beauty emanating from a child they had previously deemed invisible. Tanya had stopped struggling against the security guards, her face wet with silent tears of pride and fear. She knew her son's talent, had heard him practicing on tabletops and windowsills, but even she had never heard him play like this, with a real instrument under his fingers and his heart in every note. Alexander Whitfield appeared in the doorway, drawn by the music. He stood transfixed, genuine appreciation dawning on his face as he watched the small boy commanding the magnificent instrument. Vincent Reynolds, despite his intoxication, or perhaps because of it, his defenses lowered by alcohol, swayed to the music, his professional assessment cutting through his stupor. "Extraordinary," he murmured loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Absolutely extraordinary technique. Self-taught by the look of his hand positioning. My God, what this kid could do with proper training." As Marcus approached the end of the piece, he opened his eyes briefly, catching sight of Mr. Washington standing near a service entrance, nodding encouragement. The old gardener's face shone with a fierce pride that gave Marcus the courage to take one final risk. He segued into an improvisation, creating music that existed only in that moment, joyful, defiant, speaking of struggles and hope and a future not yet written. When the final note faded, the ballroom remained silent for 3 heartbeats. Then thunderous applause erupted, startling Marcus almost off the bench. People were standing, clapping with genuine enthusiasm, some wiping away unexpected tears. Eleanor remained frozen, the adoption papers still clutched in her hand, her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. Alexander pushed through the crowd to reach the piano, his face alight with excitement. "Young man, that was absolutely remarkable," he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Before Marcus could answer, the security guards finally relented, allowing Tanya to rush to her son's side. She put a protective arm around his shoulders, her body trembling with emotion. "He taught himself, sir," she said, a tremor in her voice, but her head held high. "We could never afford lessons." A distinguished-looking woman in her 60s pushed her way forward, Catherine Chen, director of the prestigious Berkshire Academy of Music. "That's even more impressive," she said, eyeing Marcus with professional interest. "Young man, have you ever considered formal training? You have a rare gift." Vincent Reynolds stumbled to the piano, more sober now than he had been all evening. "Kid's got more raw talent than half my students at Juilliard," he announced to the room at large. Eleanor, seeing control of the situation and her carefully cultivated social image slipping away, attempted to regain the upper hand. "Well," she said with a tight smile, "what a charming little performance. I think we can all agree it was unusual." She tried to tuck the adoption papers back into her purse discreetly, but Alexander noticed the movement. "Eleanor, aren't those the adoption papers you were waving around earlier?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild. "When you promised to adopt this talented young man, if he could play," the crowd, sensing drama, fell silent again. Eleanor's smile became brittle. "It was clearly a joke, Alexander. Everyone understood that." "Did they?" Alexander raised an eyebrow, looking around the room. "Because it seems to me that young Marcus here has fulfilled the terms of your challenge admirably." Eleanor's face flushed an ugly red. "Don't be ridiculous. I am not adopting a housekeeper's child because he can bang out a few classical tunes." The words hung in the air, revealing more of her true character than she had ever intended to display publicly. Smartphones had captured everything: her challenge, the cruel laughter, Marcus's extraordinary performance, and now her naked disdain. Tomorrow, Boston society would have a new scandal to dissect, and Eleanor Whitfield would be at its center. But for Marcus, standing now between his mother and Mr. Whitfield, the evening had changed everything. He had been invisible then, a target of mockery, and now stood revealed as a prodigy. As cameras flashed and questions flew, he felt something shifting in the air around him, opportunity opening like a door that had previously been locked and barred. The Whitfield Charity Gala concluded with a record-breaking $2.7 million in donations, nearly triple the previous year's amount. The irony was not lost on Tanya that her son's unplanned performance had generated more enthusiasm and generosity than any professional musician could have. As the last guests departed shortly after midnight, the staff began the enormous task of returning the mansion to its usual immaculate state. Marcus helped collect discarded programs and napkins, aware of the changed way other servers looked at him now, with respect, curiosity, even a touch of awe. The kitchen buzzed with whispered conversations about the piano boy and what might happen next. What happened next became clear. As soon as Eleanor Whitfield slammed into the kitchen, her designer gown swishing angrily around her legs, her face contorted with barely contained fury. "In my office." Now she snapped at Tanya, not acknowledging Marcus at all. In the elegant home office with its leather-bound books and awards for philanthropy, Eleanor didn't bother with pretense. "You planned this," she hissed, pacing like a caged tiger. "You and that boy made me look like a fool in front of everyone who matters in this city." Tanya stood straight, one hand on Marcus's shoulder. "No, ma'am. Marcus simply played when you demanded he play." "Don't you dare use that tone with me," Eleanor snarled. "You're fired. Both of you out of my house within the hour. And I promise you I will make certain no one in my circle ever hires you again." Alexander appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "Eleanor, that's enough." She whirled on him. "Stay out of this, Alexander. This is between me and the help." The help, Alexander's voice, was dangerously quiet. "Is that how you refer to people when I'm not around?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Eleanor's expression shifted, calculated charm replacing naked anger. "Darling, I'm simply upset. The evening was supposed to be about our foundation, and instead it became about this." She waved dismissively at Marcus and Tanya. Alexander studied his wife for a long moment. "I think it would be best if Tanya and Marcus gather their things and leave for tonight," he said finally. "Emotions are running high, and we all need time to process what happened." He turned to Tanya. "I apologize for this situation. Please know that I found your son's performance remarkable." As Tanya and Marcus collected their belongings from the servant quarters, Mr. Washington appeared, his weathered face lined with concern. "I heard what happened," he said. "Mrs. Whitfield has a mean streak wider than the Charles River when she's crossed." As they prepared to leave, Alexander approached them at the service entrance, pressing a business card into Tanya's hand. "Call me tomorrow," he said quietly. "This isn't over." The ride home on the last bus of the night was silent, both Tanya and Marcus lost in their own thoughts. Their tiny apartment felt especially cramped and shabby after the opulence of the Whitfield mansion. As Marcus got ready for bed, Tanya's phone began buzzing with notifications. Social media clips of Marcus's performance were already going viral, shared by guests who had captured the moment on their phones. Prodigy Humiliates socialite read one headline. "Watch this self-taught piano genius silence a room of Boston's elite," proclaimed another. By morning, Marcus's performance had been viewed over 2 million times, and interview requests from local news stations were flooding Tanya's phone. "What do we do now, Mom?" Marcus asked over a breakfast of generic cereal, the last in their pantry. Without her job at the Whitfields, they had maybe 2 weeks before they couldn't make rent. Tanya stared at her coffee, mind racing. "I don't know, baby, but we'll figure it out together." A text message lit up her phone, Catherine Chen, from the Berkshire Academy of Music, requesting a meeting that afternoon. Hope fluttered in Tanya's chest, quickly tempered by practicality. Elite music schools weren't free, and scholarships rarely covered living expenses. Before she could respond, another notification appeared, a news alert about the Whitfield Gala. Eleanor had given an interview, smiling benevolently, as she claimed to have discovered Marcus's talent. "I've always believed in giving opportunities to gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds," she told the reporter, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "That's why I challenged young Marcus to play. I knew he had something special." Tanya nearly threw her phone across the room in disgust. The doorbell rang, the first of many visitors that day. Reporters wanting statements. Neighbors curious about the sudden attention. A representative from a local piano store offering Marcus the chance to practice on their instruments for publicity purposes only. By afternoon, they were overwhelmed. Mr. Washington visited, bringing groceries and advice. "Don't trust any offer that comes easy," he warned. "These vultures smell a story, not a child who needs nurturing." Catherine Chen's visit was different. The music school director listened to Marcus play on their neighbor's out-of-tune upright piano, asked intelligent questions about his self-teaching methods, and spoke frankly about the challenges ahead. "You have extraordinary natural talent," she told Marcus, "but you're years behind in formal training." It would take intensive work and complete dedication. "We can't afford your school, Miss Chen," Tanya said directly. "I appreciate your interest in my son, but we have to be realistic." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "There are scholarships, of course, but you're right to be practical. Let me see what I can arrange." Meanwhile, Eleanor had launched a more insidious campaign. Society friends received calls suggesting that Tanya was an opportunist who had coached her son to embarrass the Whitfields. Subtle hints about the Johnson family's trustworthiness were dropped to potential employers. Boston's elite circles were small and gossipy. Such whispers spread like wildfire. Alexander called as promised, his voice grave. "Eleanor is not handling this well," he admitted. "I've tried to reason with her, but she's determined to make this difficult for you. I'd like to help if you'll allow it." Tanya's pride warred with practicality. "What kind of help?" she asked cautiously. "A position at my foundation," he replied. "And support for Marcus's education, wherever that may lead." That evening, as Marcus practiced finger exercises on their kitchen table, still no real piano, Tanya weighed their limited options. Accept Alexander's help and risk Eleanor's escalating wrath. Pursue the music school opportunity and face years of financial struggle. Return to their previous life pretending the gala had never happened. The viral video had changed. Everything yet solved nothing. Marcus looked up from his practice, seeing the worry on his mother's face. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said softly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Tanya pulled him into a fierce hug. "You have nothing to apologize for. Your talent is a gift, not a problem." But as she held her son, she couldn't help wondering if his gift would lift them up or become another burden too heavy to bear. I have a question for everyone watching this story unfold. What would you do if you were Tanya? Comment number 1. If you think she should accept Alexander's help despite the risks. Comment number 2. If you believe she should keep Marcus away from the Whitfields completely. Have you ever had to choose between a difficult opportunity and a safer path? Like this video if you've faced tough decisions about your child's future or your own dreams. Subscribe to see what choices Tanya makes and how this story of talent and prejudice continues to unfold. Will Eleanor succeed in her campaign against this family, or will Marcus's gift prove stronger than her malice? 1 week after the gala that had upended their lives, a sleek black car pulled up outside the rundown apartment building where the Johnsons lived. Alexander Whitfield stepped out looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit amid the graffiti-covered walls and overflowing trash bins. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, whispering about the luxury vehicle and its wealthy occupant. Inside their small apartment, Tanya hastily cleared dirty dishes from the coffee table and straightened the second-hand furniture. The ceiling leaked in one corner, a steady drip-drip into a plastic bucket, providing unwelcome background music. When Alexander knocked, Marcus opened the door, his expression a mixture of wariness and hope. Alexander took in the cramped living space with one sweeping glance, the pull-out couch where mother and son slept, the water stains on the walls, the carefully mended curtains. His expression revealed nothing, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, remaining standing when Tanya offered him their only decent chair. "I wanted to speak with you in person about a few matters." The contrast between his world and theirs hung in the air between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Alexander seemed to make a decision. "I'll be direct. My marriage to Eleanor has been troubled for some time. What happened at the gala, her treatment of you both, particularly, Marcus forced me to confront issues I've been avoiding." He sighed heavily. "I built my company on principles of fairness and innovation. Somewhere along the way, I started overlooking Eleanor's behavior to keep the peace." Tanya listened cautiously, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had learned long ago not to trust the sudden benevolence of wealthy white employers. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Whitfield?" Alexander straightened. "2 things. First, I'd like to offer you a position as Community Outreach Coordinator at the Whitfield Foundation. The salary is $80,000 a year, with full benefits. Second, I want to establish a scholarship for Marcus to attend whatever music school best develops his talent." The figures made Tanya's head swim. It was more money than she had ever earned, more security than she had dared hope for since her husband's death. But suspicion kept her from reaching too quickly for this lifeline. "And what do you expect in return?" Alexander looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Nothing beyond your professional contributions to the foundation." "This isn't charity, Tanya. I've seen your work ethic, your integrity. The foundation needs someone who understands the communities we serve." Before Tanya could respond, her phone chimed with an email notification. It was from the Berkshire Academy of Music. Marcus had been invited to audition for their Young Artist program, a selective track for exceptionally gifted children. The audition was scheduled for the following week. Hope and anxiety battled in Tanya's chest. An audition was just the first step, and even with a scholarship, the associated costs would be substantial. Transportation to and from the academy, appropriate clothing, sheet music, eventually a piano for home practice. The list seemed endless. As if reading her thoughts, Alexander added, "The scholarship would cover all related expenses, not just tuition. Marcus's talent deserves to be nurtured without financial stress hanging over your heads." Tanya felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "This is very generous, but I need to be honest. Eleanor made it clear she intends to make life difficult for us. Accepting your help might escalate the situation." Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "Eleanor's actions are becoming increasingly problematic. She's launched a whisper campaign against you in our social circle, calling you an opportunist who coached Marcus to embarrass her publicly." He shook his head. "I'm addressing this directly, including with legal counsel if necessary." As they discussed the details, Marcus sat quietly by the window, listening, but also watching the street below. He spotted a familiar car parking across the street, Eleanor's red Mercedes. She didn't get out, just sat watching their building, her presence a silent threat. That evening, after Alexander left, another email arrived. The famous black pianist Dr. Ellington Carter had seen Marcus's viral performance and wanted to meet him. Dr. Carter was not just any pianist. He was a legend, a child prodigy himself who had broken racial barriers in classical music decades ago, performing at Carnegie Hall at just 16. Now in his 70s, he rarely took on students, making his interest in Marcus extraordinary. "Mom, do you know who Dr. Carter is?" Marcus's voice shook with excitement as he showed her the email. "He's one of the greatest pianists ever. He wants to meet me." Tanya smiled at her son's enthusiasm, but felt the weight of mounting complications. Alexander's offer promised financial security. The Berkshire Academy offered prestigious training. Dr. Carter offered mentorship from someone who had navigated the classical music world as a black artist. And hovering over it all was Eleanor Whitfield's shadow, threatening to darken any path they chose. The next day brought more developments. A journalist from the Boston Globe called, wanting to interview them for a feature on hidden talents in underprivileged communities. The phrasing made Tanya wince, but publicity might provide some protection against Eleanor's machinations. Then Mr. Washington visited, bringing troubling news. "Eleanor's been digging into the Whitfield family trust," he said gravely. "She's claiming Alexander doesn't have authority to offer foundation positions without board approval. And she's on the board." He hesitated before continuing. "There's something else you should know. The Whitfield fortune wasn't all earned through Alexander's innovations. His grandfather made the initial family money through real estate deals that displaced entire black neighborhoods in the 1950s. They bought land cheap through intimidation and corrupt officials, then developed it for huge profits. The revelation added another layer of complexity to Alexander's offer. Was his generosity genuine, or an attempt to assuage generational guilt? The morning of Marcus's audition arrived with new challenges. Marcus had woken from nightmares about the gala, his fingers trembling as he practiced on the tabletop. "What if I can't play like that again?" he whispered. "What if it was just luck?" Tanya knelt beside him. "It wasn't luck, Marcus. It was years of practice and determination. Your gift is real." Nevertheless, she worried. The viral video had created expectations that would be difficult for any 12-year-old to meet, especially one who had never performed publicly before that night. As they prepared to leave for the audition, Dr. Carter called. "I'd like to accompany Marcus today," he said, his deep voice warm even through the phone. "Young talent needs protection as much as promotion. I've seen too many prodigies exploited or burned out before they reach their potential. His offer felt like the first unambiguously positive development in days. When they arrived at the Berkshire Academy, an imposing brick building with ivy-covered walls and an intimidating reputation, Dr. Carter was waiting. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and penetrating dark eyes, he greeted Marcus with the respect of one musician to another, not an adult to a child. "Show them who you are, young man," he said simply, "not who they expect you to be." The audition panel consisted of 5 judges, all white, all wearing expressions of polite skepticism as Marcus took his seat at the grand piano. The room's perfect acoustics amplified his every breath, every movement of the bench as he adjusted his position. Closing his eyes, Marcus thought of his father's voice, of Mr. Washington's encouragement, of his mother's sacrifices. Then he began to play. His selection was bold. A piece he had composed himself, incorporating classical structures, but infused with jazz influences that spoke to his own experiences. When he finished, the silence in the room felt charged with possibility. As they left the building, a reporter approached them, thrust a microphone toward Tanya. "Is it true that Eleanor Whitfield has filed a complaint with Child Protective Services, claiming you're exploiting your son for financial gain?" The question hit like a physical blow. Tanya stumbled back, instinctively pulling Marcus behind her. Dr. Carter stepped forward, his imposing presence creating a barrier between them and the reporter. "No comment," he said firmly. "Any further questions can be directed to my office." In the car afterward, Tanya fought against rising panic. "She's trying to take him from me," she whispered. Dr. Carter's expression was grim but determined. "She won't succeed. But this confirms what I suspected: your son's talent has made him a target. Not just for those who would support him, but for those who would control or diminish him." He looked at Marcus, who sat pale and silent in the back seat. The classical music world can be brutal for anyone, but especially for young black artists who challenge the established order. The question now is, are you ready to face that challenge? Marcus met the famous pianist's gaze steadily. "I have to be," he said simply. "Music is who I am." The morning of Marcus's final audition dawned with an unexpected visitor. Tanya opened the apartment door to find Eleanor Whitfield standing in the hallway, immaculately dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than 6 months' rent. Her presence in this rundown building was jarring, like finding a peacock in a chicken coop. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice artificially pleasant. "I believe we have matters to discuss." Tanya hesitated, every instinct warning her to shut the door. But curiosity and a desire to face this woman on her own terms won out. Briefly, she said, stepping aside. Eleanor entered, her nose wrinkling slightly at the apartment's shabbiness. She declined to sit, instead opening her expensive handbag and withdrawing a checkbook. "I'll be direct," she said, uncapping a fountain pen that probably cost more than Tanya's entire wardrobe. "This situation has become unnecessarily complicated. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 to drop this charade and leave Boston." She began writing the check, her manicured hand steady. "Your son can pursue music anywhere. There are plenty of other cities with decent programs for talented children from your background." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tanya stared at the check Eleanor was writing, momentarily speechless. The amount represented more money than she had ever seen at once, enough to start fresh somewhere else away from Eleanor's influence. And in return, she finally asked. Eleanor smiled thinly. "You'll sign an NDA regarding the events at my home. You'll decline any further interviews about the incident. And most importantly, you'll persuade Marcus to withdraw from today's final audition." She held out the check. "I think that's more than fair, considering the circumstances." From the hallway came Marcus's voice, small but clear. "No." He stepped into the living room, still in his pajamas, but with his shoulders squared. "We don't want your money, Mrs. Whitfield." Eleanor's smile disappeared. "This doesn't concern you, boy. The adults are talking." "It's my life," Marcus countered. "And my music. You can't buy that." Eleanor's mask of civility slipped completely. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. Do you have any idea who I am in this city? One word from me, and every door you're hoping will open will slam shut in your face." She turned back to Tanya. Control your child or suffer the consequences. I've already filed a countersuit against Alexander for defamation. I've submitted formal complaints to the Berkshire Academy Board questioning their sudden interest in a child with no formal training. And that's just the beginning. Tanya felt a cold rage building inside her, the kind of anger she had suppressed for years while working in homes where she was treated as less than human. "Get out of my home," she said quietly. "We're not interested in your money or your threats." Eleanor stepped closer, using her height advantage to loom over Tanya. "You think you've won because some bleeding hearts are momentarily captivated by your son's little parlor trick? You're nothing. Less than nothing. Just another black single mother trying to capitalize on a moment of attention." The naked racism in her words hung in the air like poison. Marcus moved to stand beside his mother. "You're wrong about us," he said, his voice stronger now. "And you were wrong at the gala. You thought I couldn't play, that I didn't belong in your world. But the problem isn't that I don't belong in your world, Mrs. Whitfield. The problem is that you don't want to admit that your world has always included people like us. We just weren't allowed to show our talents." Eleanor's face contorted with fury. She raised her hand as if to strike him, but froze at the sound of a man clearing his throat. Dr. Ellington Carter stood in the doorway that Tanya had left ajar, his phone held up clearly recording. Behind him stood Alexander Whitfield, his expression thunderous. "I believe that's enough," Eleanor Alexander said, stepping into the apartment. "I thought you might try something like this. I just didn't expect you to be quite so explicit about your motivations." Eleanor's face drained of color. "You're spying on me now, having me followed. Protecting a child's future isn't spying," Dr. Carter said, calmly stopping the recording and pocketing his phone. "And given what I've just witnessed, I'd say it was necessary." Eleanor whirled back to Tanya. "This isn't over," she hissed. "If you think I'll let some maid and her bastard child humiliate me, that's enough." Alexander's voice cracked like a whip. "One more word, Eleanor, and I'll have your belongings moved out of the house before you return. The divorce papers are filed. Don't make this uglier than it already is." Eleanor stormed out, shouldering roughly past Dr. Carter, her high heels clicking aggressively down the hallway. In the silence that followed, Marcus looked up at the three adults. "I still have to play today, don't I?" he asked quietly. Dr. Carter nodded solemnly. "More than ever, young man. There are moments in life that define us. How we respond to cruelty and prejudice is one of those moments." The Berkshire Academy's final audition was held in their small concert hall with an audience of faculty board members and current students. The pressure was immense, the stakes higher than ever after Eleanor's threats. Backstage, Marcus closed his eyes, trying to control his trembling hands. His nightmares about the gala had intensified dreams where he sat at the piano but couldn't play a single note, where the audience's mocking laughter swelled until it drowned him. "I'm scared, Mom," he admitted in a whisper. Tanya knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "Remember what Dad used to say. Fear is just excitement that hasn't made up its mind yet." She smiled, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Whatever happens today, I am so proud of you. Not just for your talent, but for your courage." When Marcus walked onto the stage, the spotlights momentarily blinded him. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out the panel of judges, their expressions unreadable. The piano waited, its lid raised like a great black wing. Marcus took his seat, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment he froze, Eleanor's cruel words echoing in his mind. Then he remembered all the times he had been made to feel invisible at the Whitfield's house, in stores where security followed him, but not white children at school, when teachers overlooked his raised hand. He began to play, pouring all those experiences into the music. His composition told the story of his journey, the struggle, the persistence, the moments of beauty found in unexpected places. He played about his father's death, about his mother's sacrifices, about the night at the gala when he had finally been seen. When the last note faded, there was no applause, just a profound silence, the kind that falls when people are moved beyond conventional responses. Several of the judges wiped tears from their eyes. The head of the panel, a stern-looking woman who had not smiled once during the preliminaries, simply nodded, a gesture that somehow conveyed more approval than effusive praise. Outside the academy, they found a social worker weighting a folder tucked under her arm, her expression professionally neutral. "Miss Johnson, I'm from Child Protective Services. We've received a complaint regarding your son." The world seemed to tilt beneath Tanya's feet. This was Eleanor's final weapon, the threat she had barely veiled during their confrontation. Dr. Carter stepped forward. "I believe you'll find," he said with quiet authority, "that the complaint was filed maliciously by a woman who was recorded today making racist threats against this family. My lawyer will be providing that recording to your department and to the district attorney's office if necessary." The social worker hesitated clearly, not having expected this response. "I'm still required to investigate any complaint." "Of course," Alexander interrupted smoothly. "And you'll find a mother who has sacrificed everything for her child's well-being, who has worked multiple jobs to keep a roof over his head, who has nurtured an extraordinary talent despite having no resources to do so." He handed her his business card. "I'll personally vouch for Miss Johnson's character and parenting. Any further questions can be directed to my office." As the social worker departed, promising to be in touch, Tanya felt something breaking inside her, the dam that had held back her emotions throughout this ordeal. "She really would try to take my son," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Because he dared to have talent. Because he dared to show it." Dr. Carter placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "But she won't succeed," he said firmly. "Some people cannot stand to see others rise, especially those they've been taught to view as beneath them. But rise you will, young Marcus. Rise you must." 3 months later, the historic Orpheum Theater in downtown Boston hummed with anticipation. Every seat was filled from the orchestra section to the highest balcony. Outside, a line still stretched around the block, people hoping for last-minute cancellations willing to stand in the back just to witness the event that had become the talk of the city. Backstage, Marcus Johnson adjusted his bow tie, his reflection in the dressing room mirror, showing a changed young man. He had grown an inch taller in the past months. His shoulders were straighter, his gaze more confident. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes after the gala had faded, replaced by purpose. 5 minutes, Marcus called the stage manager, knocking briefly on the door. Tanya entered looking elegant in a simple blue dress, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo. As the new community outreach coordinator for the Whitfield Foundation, she had grown into her role with natural grace and determination, implementing programs that genuinely served communities rather than just providing photo opportunities. "For wealthy donors. Ready?" she asked, straightening his already perfect tie. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "I keep thinking about everything that happened to bring us here. If Mrs. Whitfield hadn't tried to humiliate me that night." Tanya squeezed his shoulder. "Some people create beauty despite the world's cruelty. That's what you've done." The past 3 months had been transformative. After the confrontation in their apartment, the recording of Eleanor's racist tirade had somehow leaked online. The resulting scandal had destroyed her social standing almost overnight. Boston society, eager to distance themselves from explicit racism while continuing to benefit from its more subtle forms, had closed ranks against her rather than risk association. Alexander had finalized their divorce, publicly apologizing for his role in enabling her behavior over the years. "I was complicit through my silence," he had stated in a press conference that went viral. Moving forward, the Whitfield Foundation will actively work to address systemic inequalities in our city, starting with our own practices. The Child Services investigation had been closed within days, finding no evidence to support Eleanor's malicious claims. Instead, the investigator had written a glowing report about Tanya's parenting despite difficult circumstances, noting Marcus's obvious happiness and well-being. The Berkshire Academy had not only accepted Marcus with a full scholarship, but had created a new accelerated program tailored to students with exceptional talent but non-traditional backgrounds. The rigorous schedule included intensive technical training to fill the gaps in his formal education while nurturing his natural creativity and compositional skills. Dr. Carter had established a foundation to identify talented children from underprivileged backgrounds, providing instruments, lessons, and mentorship. He had personally taken Marcus under his wing, spending hours guiding his development as both a pianist and a composer. Music gave me a voice when the world tried to silence me. The legendary pianist had told Marcus during their first official lesson. Now it's your turn to speak through your art. The most surprising transformation had been Alexander Whitfield. Following the divorce, he had thrown himself into reforming his foundation, working closely with Tanya to create programs with genuine impact. He had purchased the rundown apartment building where the Johnsons had lived, renovating it to provide safe, affordable housing for its existing tenants while adding a small music school for neighborhood children. Tonight's concert was the culmination of these changes. The Orpheum's audience was deliberately diverse, with tickets distributed to community centers, public schools, and neighborhood organizations to ensure the crowd represented the real Boston, not just its wealthy elite. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, blinking in the bright lights. The applause was thunderous, rolling through the theater like a wave. He took his seat at the grand piano, adjusted the bench, and allowed himself one sweeping glance across the audience. In the front row sat his mother, flanked by Dr. Carter and Alexander Whitfield. Mr. Washington was there too, beaming with pride. Scattered throughout the audience, Marcus could see children from his old neighborhood, their eyes wide with wonder at being in this magnificent space, seeing someone who looked like them command the stage. At the back of the theater, barely visible, a figure slipped in just as the house lights dimmed. Eleanor Whitfield, much diminished from her former glory, attempted to take a seat but was quietly intercepted by security. The restraining order that Tanya had obtained after the apartment confrontation was still in effect. Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began to play his original composition titled Visibility. It began softly, hesitantly, like a question asked in a whisper. Then it grew, gathering strength and complexity, weaving together classical techniques with jazz improvisations and elements of gospel that honored his family's roots. The piece told his story without words, the struggles, the persistence, the triumph not just over Eleanor's cruelty, but over a system designed to keep talent like his invisible. When the final notes faded, the audience erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the historic building. Marcus stood bowing deeply, then gestured to his mother to join him on stage. As Tanya walked up the steps, her eyes shining with tears of joy, Marcus took the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, his voice steady despite his youth. "Music has given me a voice, but I wouldn't be here without my mother, who worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads and never stopped believing in me, even when the world made that very difficult." He turned to Tanya. "Mom, the Whitfield Foundation has established an educational grant in your name. You can finally pursue your own dream of becoming a teacher." Tanya covered her mouth in shock as Alexander nodded confirmation from the front row. Marcus continued, "I want to say something important to all the kids out there who might be watching or listening. There will be people who try to make you feel small, who say you don't belong, who mock your dreams. Don't believe them. Your talent is real. Your voice matters. Your presence changes, rooms changes, conversations changes the world." After the performance, Marcus and Tanya visited their old apartment building, now transformed into decent housing, with a small music school on the ground floor. As they entered the studio space where a dozen keyboards had been set up for neighborhood children, a small girl approached Marcus shyly. "I can't reach all the keys yet," she confessed, demonstrating her small hands. Marcus knelt beside her piano bench. "Neither could I at first," he told her, showing her how to adapt the fingering to fit her reach. "But you know what? Play anyway. Play your truth. The world might not be ready, but play anyway." As they worked together, Tanya watched from the doorway, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from a tiny apartment with a paper keyboard to a concert hall, from invisibility to recognition, from one child's talent to a movement that might open doors for many others. The adoption papers from the gala night hung framed on the wall of Marcus's new room in their modest but comfortable new home. Not as a reminder of Eleanor's cruelty, but as a symbol of the path, not taken the path where his talent would have been controlled and commodified rather than nurtured on his own terms. In the end, Eleanor Whitfield had offered Marcus a kind of twisted gift. In trying to humiliate him, she had instead forced the world to see him, In challenging him to play, she had unknowingly given him the stage his talent deserved. And in demonstrating the ugly face of prejudice so publicly, she had created an opportunity for real change that went beyond one boy and one piano. What do you think about this incredible journey? Has a moment of adversity ever led to unexpected opportunities in your life? Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. If Marcus's story of perseverance against prejudice resonated with you, please like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories about people overcoming incredible odds, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their voice matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful music comes from those who were told to remain silent. This story teaches us powerful truths about human dignity and potential. When Eleanor tried to humiliate Marcus, she revealed more about her own character than his abilities. True talent cannot remain hidden forever, no matter how society tries to suppress it. Marcus's journey shows that excellence is the most powerful response to prejudice. The story also reveals how privilege operates. Eleanor weaponized her social position, financial power, and even government systems against a child and his mother simply because they challenged her worldview. Yet these same systems of power can be redirected toward justice when people like Alexander Dr. Carter and Catherine Chen choose to use their influence responsibly. We learn that talent alone isn't enough. It requires nurturing opportunity and allies willing to stand against injustice. Marcus's gift might have remained undiscovered without his own determination to practice, despite having no real piano. Perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that transformation is possible. Communities can change when exposed to undeniable excellence. Individuals can grow when confronted with their complicity in unjust systems. And children can rise beyond the limitations others place on them when they refuse to become invisible. True victory isn't just personal success, but creating pathways for others to follow. What moment in your life forced others to see your true value after they had dismissed you? Or when have you witnessed someone's talent completely change how others viewed them? Share your story in the comments below. If Marcus's journey against prejudice moved you, please like this video to help others find this important message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming discrimination and breaking barriers. And if you know someone facing their own Eleanor Whitfield, someone trying to make them feel small or invisible, share this video as a reminder that talent and dignity always shine through eventually. Thank you for watching, and remember, your presence matters, your voice deserves to be heard, and your gifts can change not just your life, but the world around you.